This is Instant Recall. Open any plugin, the knobs remember your controls. Change a preset, the knobs snap to the right positions. Automate parameters, and the knobs follow. The Roto-Control by Melbourne Instruments is an evolution of MIDI controllers. In this video, we'll explore the features for music studios and live performance, and I'll talk about some pros and cons as well. So what makes the Roto-Control unique? Well, the coolest thing about it is that the knobs move by themselves. So you know how regular MIDI controllers have knobs, but they don't move automatically. These knobs automatically adjust to match your saved settings. And if your saved settings have automation, they'll follow that as well. So why is this so useful? Imagine you're working on a synth sound. You tweak the filter, resonance, and LFO rate until it sounds perfect. You save your project, close it, and come back later. Well, on a normal MIDI controller, you'll manually have to move all those knobs back to the right spots to pick up where you left off, twisting them around to find the right spot. There's absolutely no way to visually see your settings and get that smooth transition to control something like a filter sweep. With the Roto-Control, you don't have to do that. When you reload your project or even just switch between plugins, the knobs physically move to where they were before. No more guessing, no more wasted time. This also works when switching presets in a plugin. The knobs instantly snap to the right settings for that preset. But it gets even better. There's even haptic feedback. I can feel it responding differently. It applies pressure when I turn, and you can customize this. I can even create steps. Check it out. By default, the knobs turn fully, but depending on the virtual knob in your software, the Roto-Control creates a start and end point so that you can feel it. So as you turn the knob, you know where the control starts and ends. And like I said, you can customize how the knobs respond. The smooth mode turns like a regular knob. There's no resistance. The stepped mode adds little clicks. It's great for things like filter types or LFO speeds. And there are even custom labels. Instead of just guessing, you can have steps labeled as low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch, for example. And you can see those on the screen. I've actually mapped that to a button here, which you can also customize as well. This makes it way more useful to use this without a computer screen compared to other MIDI controllers. Now, it gets really interesting when you use this with hardware synths. I'll show you that in a bit. But since I mentioned the screens, right under each knob, there's a small screen that tells you exactly what that knob is doing. Again, something you don't really find on other MIDI controllers, except maybe for something like the native instrument stuff. The screen shows the name of what you're controlling, like frequency, resonance, oscillator position, attack, decay, sustain, release. And when you switch sounds or presets, the screen changes too. You can give each knob a different color, so it's super simple to find what you need. And you have multiple pages. Also, Ableton Live will assign colors for tracks automatically. I'll show you everything it can control with Ableton Live because as of now, that's the DAW they've optimized it for. Okay, before we get to Ableton, check out this hardware synth action. If your hardware synth sends MIDI feedback, the knobs will move by themselves. And Melbourne tells me that if your hardware synth sends MIDI CCs when loading presets, the knobs will snap to position too. Now, I will say, I couldn't get it to work with the Oberheim LBX8 or a couple other synths I tried. It controls everything just fine, but snapping when you change a preset, not yet. So why do motorized knobs matter? Well, they could actually save you time for one, and it kind of makes music more fun and a little easier. If you're into sound design, this could be a game changer. And for live performance, it could be too. You can switch between songs, presets, and settings instantly without having to reset anything by hand. Check it out. I've mapped the controls in Arturia's Analog Lab. And now when I switch presets, the knobs instantly snap to the right place. Now, granted, it isn't perfect. Analog Lab changes the types of controls depending on the instruments it's loaded, but it's still way ahead of what other controllers can do. And this works even better when you use a regular synth like Serum or Pigments. You can pretty much map everything because the Roto-Control has multiple pages. And as you scroll through the pages, the knobs snap into place for that particular control. If you're mixing, this means instant recall for volume, effects, pans, anything you've assigned. So let's talk about mixing in Ableton Live. And by the way, if you're making music at home, you might not be getting the best sound or workflow from your space. I put together a free guide with 20 simple but powerful tips to optimize your studio for better sound and better music making. Get it now from the description of this video, and you can start improving your studio today. So there are 3 modes on the Roto-Control. There's mix mode for controlling Ableton Live's mixer. It auto-maps the volume faders, track mute, solo, and pan, and even sends. The cool thing about pan is you can feel the center point because it creates a little bit of resistance right in the middle, and you can visually see where different tracks are panned. The labels update to match Ableton's track names and the colors in Ableton. If I add a track, the Roto-Control updates it in real time. The next mode is called plugin mode, and this is for controlling Ableton devices or plugins. You teach the Roto-Control once, and it remembers anytime you load that instrument plugin again. This works for both Ableton stock and third-party plugins. You saw me show you Analog Lab and Serum already. So check out how I've mapped Ableton's wavetable synth. I've even mapped buttons to control the filter type. I can cycle through the oscillator position. You can map whatever you want. On page 2, I've mapped oscillator 2. You can also map Ableton effects in the same way. I've done that with a filter device here, and it remembers anytime I load this plugin again. For the auto filter plugin, I've actually mapped the shape of the LFOs here. And I've changed the knob to a step feel so I can actually feel each time I'm switching it. Let me show you how easy it is to map any plugin. I've just loaded Operator in Ableton Live, and let's just map a few controls. Click on Learn here, turn which knob I want to learn, and let's just choose some random things. There's amount, there's frequency, resonance, those are easy. Then let's choose, I don't know, let's choose coarse and fine. Let's choose some ADSR as well. There we go. Now it's learned it, and I can control all these things right away. Now it's also learned this for every time I reload Operator. So if I load another Operator preset, there you go. They just snap, all these controls snap to the right position. And you can map buttons in the same way. All right, let's try a third-party synth. The Learn feature is easy, and you can do it on anything, Pigments, Serum, and it remembers your assignments across different projects. Now, this whole Learn thing doesn't work as well for Ableton presets or grouped devices. You know, the ones that are labeled with the ADG, but it works fine for the ones labeled ADV. All right, so how about DAW automation? Yes, it does that. Also for Ableton Live, you have transport controls. Play, stop, record, loop, punch in, punch out, and record arm. All right, so what about other DAWs? Well, for now, the Roto-Control is optimized for Ableton Live, but it still works with other DAWs in its MIDI mode. For Logic Pro, FL Studio, it'll work as a general MIDI controller, but it does lack the deep integration that it has for Ableton Live. You can still control things like track volumes, pans, sends, and you can learn plugin parameters manually. Firmware updates from Melbourne Instruments might bring future DAW support. We'll see. Actually, if you use another DAW, comment below and let the DAW companies know that you want to use the Roto-Control with your DAW. So I showed you that the Roto-Control also works with hardware synths. You map its motorized knobs to your synth's MIDI parameters, just like you would with a plugin. You want to control filter cutoff, resonance, or LFO depth. You can also use the built-in recorder for some automation. I tested this with the Oberheim OBX8, and I was able to record and play back real-time filter sweeps, resonance changes, and more. This is something most hardware synths can't do on their own since they don't have built-in automation like software synths. Now, does this work for every synth? If your synth accepts MIDI CC messages, this will work. I tested with my Arturia synths, my Sequential Take 5, and the OBX8, and it worked great for manual control and automation. However, if you were hoping for full instant recall when you switch presets, that only works if the synth sends MIDI feedback when loading a preset. And a lot of synths, including my Oberheim OBX8, don't do that. All right, so let's talk about some pros and cons with the Roto-Control. But before we get to that, do you know how easy it is to get your music out there to the world? You can do it yourself with DistroKid, the sponsor of today's video. DistroKid lets you upload your music to Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, Pandora, pretty much everywhere. Best of all, they make it really easy. Just upload your track, add some artwork, and they do the rest. DistroKid also collects earnings for you when your listeners play or purchase your music. And they help you market your music with tools built right in. A hyperfollow page lets you share your latest music with your friends on Facebook or anywhere you can share a link. And they can easily follow you to get notified of your upcoming releases. I've actually created 2 dedicated videos on DistroKid to give you all the details and how it works and how you get paid. You can watch those videos right here. And if you're ready to sign up, I'll include a link in the video description that'll give you 7% off your first year of membership. All right, so let's talk pros and cons for the Roto-Control. First of all, motorized faders for instant recall. No other MIDI controller does this, and as I use it more, the more I love it. I didn't realize how much I would. It also works with both software and hardware synths. There's deep integration with Ableton Live, you got plugin control, mixer control, and that total recall. If you use Ableton Live, this is an awesome tool to have. Highly customizable with haptic feedback, button assignments, and color coding. So what about some cons? Well, right now, full DAW support is only for Ableton Live. It still works as a MIDI controller for Logic, FL Studio, and others, but without automatic recall. Another issue is that it's really easy to map Ableton devices, but there's a bit of upfront work when mapping other plugins. But remember, it's a one-time setup for each plugin, and it just remembers from then on, forever. Another little drawback for hardware synths is that I can't get the knobs to snap to parameters when I change presets. That would just be amazing. If you're familiar with Melbourne Instruments' own hardware synths with motorized knobs, this is one of the biggest selling points in my opinion. It would be great if we could see that working on the Roto-Control. Okay, so lots of cool tricks, but are there any other MIDI controllers that can do stuff like this? Well, basically, no. No other MIDI controller can do this stuff. You can get something like the Nectar Panorama CS12, which will give you deep integration for Cubase and Logic, but no motorized knobs. The PreSonus fader port has motorized faders, but no knob recall or synth control. There are modular MIDI controllers like monograms, but again, no motorization or instant recall. None of these bring the instant parameter recall that makes the Roto-Control stand out. If you want your controls to move to match your settings, this is in a league of its own. I've never used a MIDI controller quite like this. The motorized knobs could be a game changer, especially for instant recall with software and hardware if you're playing live. And if you're an Ableton user, this is one of the most advanced controllers available right now. The Roto-Control retails for $449. This is not an impulse purchase, but if you like what you see, you're only going to get these features here. So would you use a motorized MIDI controller? And what do you think about instant recall? Let me know in the comments below. If you're buying something like the Roto-Control or anything for your studio, you want to pick the right stuff and not waste money. That's why I'm making the ultimate studio buyer's guide to help you find the best gear for your studio without the guesswork. Link is in the description. Keep making the music you love, and I'll see you in the next video.